Well, the way I got into boxing is related to how I sort of was managing my masculinity in general. When I was transitioning, it was like very sudden. For me, when I went on testosterone, I think it's different for different people, but for me it was like a very quick period of time. I was 30 years old and an adult who had a life, many decades of life before that, and then within 6 months I was experiencing the world completely differently because of how the world was experiencing me. I was abused growing up by my stepdad. Then I was mugged at gunpoint before my transition by a guy who went on to shoot 2 other men. I think I was spared because I hadn't transitioned yet and I spoke. And he realized that I wasn't a guy and let me go. And then once I transitioned, I was constantly in these dynamics where it was like a jockeying for power. That's what I think got me interested in, like, what if I start asking questions about what being a man means? And especially those questions that are making me so uncomfortable. And the first question was, you know, why do men fight? And that's how I first got involved in boxing. Even on the street, you know, like when you're walking down the street and it's like, it becomes a game of chicken, who's gonna move first? Like, that was something that was happening all the time. These are all things that maybe all men experience all the time, but I was new, I was a beginner, so I could see what was happening, and it just felt like, why is this all constructed around dominance? I think realizing that violence and masculinity, one way or another, kept being twinned was something that was disappointing, frankly. To me, like, you know, there's no better place to examine something like violence than a place where violence is happening and it's consensual. The first gym I was training at was like not where I ended up. I had a very sort of classic like first day where I got like pushed to the point where I almost threw up, and then it was like, okay, now you're ready, you know, we can keep going. And I felt like I was in a movie, and I think it put me back in touch with my body. I don't know if I've ever really been in touch with my body until I did this, which was a sort of completely surprising side effect of this process. Like, I had to assess myself, think about my strengths, think about my weaknesses, talk that through with another person who was, or many other people, my sparring partners, my coach, and it was all sort of in the interest of making me better at something rather than judging me. And I think, especially as a trans man, that was really a radical way of thinking about myself physically. I never had that before. I especially was prepared for a lot of homophobia, a lot of like sexism, and I saw moments and flashes of that, but very rarely, especially with the men I was training with, who didn't know I was trans, so it wasn't as if they were censoring themselves. Maybe I just lucked out, I don't know, but what I was really struck by was the way intimacy worked in boxing among men. I was taking cues from the men around me, and they were almost always like, in between rounds, like hugging, you know, a lot of like arm around the shoulder, a lot of like supportive comments. These guys who wanted to have friendship and intimacy and affection and emotional support. And I mean, it wasn't just the physical stuff, it was like constant conversation about people's emotional place, spiritual place. Are you sleeping enough? Are you eating enough? Like, what's going on at home? Like, how are you feeling? I mean, I think a lot of the guys I was training with just wanted to be able to have that conversation, you know? I mean, I did, and it was nice to be able to do that with people. But on the other hand, it felt sad to me that this was the only way. Like, we had to be in sort of a consensually violent relationship in order to find a way to be intimate and connected. I think regardless of gender, like, the ability to have a good relationship with with aggression, I think is probably an important part of the human experience. Boxing made me feel very tender towards men, which is really like not the outcome I was expecting at all, but I felt like there was something very profound and vulnerable about the experience, and I can't imagine, you know, no matter how sort of intense the guy you're looking at the weigh-in is being, I mean, there's no way that this person hasn't completely had to expose themselves, like, in their training to the people around them in a way I think that most men probably don't have to most of the time.